So hello everybody, and thank you all for the first. Thank you to all our listeners, and thank you, of course, to those four who are going to speak with us tonight. So starting with Kristi Rait from Estonia, Deputy Director at the International Center for Defense and Security, the ICDS. Then dzień dobry to Mateusz Piotrowski, analyst at the Polish Institute of International Affairs. And then with salute to Radu Albujomanescu, lecturer at the University Babiš-Bolyai, and of course Andreas Umland from Germany, analyst at the Stockholm Center for Eastern European Studies. So as you saw, we are going to speak about something to remember. So what to expect for the defense policies of Central and Eastern European countries facing the prospect of Trump episode 2. What can we expect for both the national defense policies of your four countries, and also what to expect for the future of the European and NATO collaboration when it's related to defense policies? So ladies first, of course, and we can start with you, Kristi. So thank you again for coming here. And my first question for you will be, what development can we expect in Estonian defense policy, whether at national, European or NATO level? What can we expect for the Estonian defense policies for the coming year?
Thank you, Aurélien. Thank you very much for this opportunity to join the discussion. So, of course, at the moment, everyone is anxiously waiting for the inauguration of President Trump in the United States on the 20th of January. But my starting point is that I would like to stress a certain difference between expectations and attitudes when we compare let's say the Central and Eastern European countries, also the Nordic countries, also Ukraine on the one hand, and then on the other hand, Western Europe. I think there is more of a panic mood in Western Europe and a sense of unpreparedness, although everyone has been talking a lot about how to Trump-proof Europe and our different policies, including defense. But then the ones who have actually been doing more to be prepared are the Baltic countries, Nordic countries, Poland, Ukraine, who have taken their defense very seriously and who have been investing a lot in defense, especially after 2014. When you look at Estonia, it's one of the very few countries in Europe that has maintained conscription all the time since regaining independence in 1991. Then since 2012, there has been agreement across the political spectrum to keep defense spending at the level of at least 2% of GDP, the NATO requirement. And in 2023, this was increased to 3% of GDP minimum, and there is a long-term commitment to keep it at that level. And also there has been a lot of effort to have good relationship with the United States, no matter who is leading the country. So the experience of the first term of President Trump was fairly positive for regional defense. Although I don't want to belittle the dangers that come with the second Trump presidency, and there is a huge uncertainty. There are many reasons to be concerned, but I think in our region, the sense is that, okay, let's try to make the best of it. There are some positive signals. We can see that already now Donald Trump and the people around him are talking to European leaders. They are talking to the Ukrainians. They have been quite in the listening mode. We see that Trump is probably serious about wanting to stop the war. He has been speaking about it so much. But it seems also that he does not yet have a clear plan how to get there. And he's thinking about it. And hopefully his views can also be influenced by allies in Europe. And we know he's more likely to listen to the countries who, in his view, are good allies and have been paying the bills, so to say. So this is the transactional logic we are in. And in a way, this situation now is a bit paradoxical because on the one hand, defense of the Baltic states as part of NATO defense is stronger than ever. When you look at the level of capabilities, preparedness, defense plans, etc. But at the same time, the security environment is worse and more threatening and less predictable than ever since the end of the Cold War. So we really have to be prepared for various scenarios. And at the same time, it is clear that certain things we know in the long term. Russia is a long-term threat. There is no doubt in our region about it. No matter how exactly things develop in Ukraine in the next few years, we have to be prepared to defend ourselves. And we also are aware that there is not going to be a common understanding with Russia about European security order, certainly during this regime, but probably also with the next one, whoever comes after Putin. Russia has its authoritarian system. It has its imperialistic mindset. It has its expansionist history and the way to look at neighboring countries as not really sovereign countries, but countries that should belong to the Russian sphere of influence. And Russia is willing to regain, restore its sphere of influence in neighboring countries if it has the opportunity to do so. And we must not give to Russia these opportunities, and we must not make Russia think that it can actually be successful in restoring its sphere of influence in Central and Eastern Europe. When we look at the next year, as I said, Trump probably wants to stop the war in Ukraine, and yet we don't know what exactly he will do. It's possible that he will increase support to Ukraine, but it is also possible that he will dramatically reduce it or maintain at the current level. And I would like to think that he does not want to be a loser in this conflict. So that is the kind of hopeful aspect for Ukraine. And also we know that he very much emphasizes China, and the US elites more broadly see China as their main adversary. So it's important now to very strongly make this case that events in Ukraine have implications for how China sees its prospects to shape the global order, to strengthen the Chinese position regionally and also globally. So this is the hope that then Trump will be willing to increase support to Ukraine in order to get to an outcome where actually Ukraine can sustain as an independent state. And of course, Ukraine will need security guarantees if we want to get to a ceasefire which is sustainable. And again, we don't have an answer yet to this question, what these security guarantees are going to be. We have this whole set of more than 20 bilateral security agreements, but these are not really guarantees. We have the promise of NATO that Ukraine will join NATO one day, but it is not clear how this issue is going to progress. I think even with the Trump administration, although his views on NATO have been contradictory, I think we still have a chance to make the case for Ukraine's NATO membership as the most effective way to provide Ukraine with security guarantees that will be needed to stabilize the situation. So the kind of relatively positive scenario would be that the US, together with other Western countries, will increase support to Ukraine, will pressure Russia to actually engage in a ceasefire. There will be security guarantees provided that will allow for stabilizing the front line. That will not end the conflict, but that is, I think, in the current circumstances, a relatively positive outlook. But then, of course, it's also a possible scenario that that the war will drag on and Ukraine will not get more support than it does get currently. And if in such circumstances Ukraine is pressured to some kind of bad deal or negotiations in circumstances where it is in a weak position, then of course it means more instability, and it also means that if Russia gains even a partial victory in Ukraine, and let's say if there will be a ceasefire in Ukraine, the concern in the Baltic states is that then Russia may actually move some of its troops from Ukraine to the regions neighboring the Baltic states, and it may be tempted to test NATO. Now, as long as NATO deterrence is credible, and so far it has worked, I don't think Russia will engage in a military conflict against any NATO country. But here again, the uncertainty is there. We cannot be sure if NATO will still look credible in the coming years, if the commitments will hold. So that is the kind of security environment. And let me just finish with a couple of words about then the Estonian defense policy in this situation. I mentioned already the defense spending level above 3% now. There is also a long-term commitment to support Ukraine by at least 0.25% of GDP. And Estonia has been making the case that if all Western countries that support Ukraine would get to that level of 0.25% of GDP as a long-term commitment, then Ukraine would actually be able to persist in this war. The support would be sufficient for Ukraine to win. But this commitment is not there. It's only the Baltic states that have joined this call. Estonia is working together with NATO allies on implementation of the NATO defense plans that were agreed in Vilnius 2023. That is work in progress. And of course, still a question mark if all NATO countries, all European countries in NATO are ready to sufficiently increase their defense spending and their efforts to actually get to the level that is required for the implementation of the new defense plans. Estonia is making the case that we should get to a new target level in NATO. 3% should be the minimum for the coming years because of the very unstable and dangerous security environment. But so far, this is a difficult discussion. And of course, it's not only about figures, it is also about how we spend and to what extent European countries are cooperating and spending more efficiently. But part of the idea of the new defense plans is that we have switched from deterrence by punishment to deterrence by denial. And the position in Estonia is that Estonia is ready to fight back from the very first moment of the Russian attack. So Estonia will be ready to push back and also to strike deep to Russian territory if necessary. And we cannot allow our territory to be partly invaded and occupied. We have seen in Ukraine what that leads to. So it would be absolutely devastating for small countries such as the Baltic states. So there has to be readiness to not to allow Russia to invade any part of the territory. So that is the ongoing work. Then also the increase of defense spending, of course, involves its own challenges, like how you actually spend the money, what do you spend it on. There is a lot of focus in Estonia on procurement of ammunition during the next years. The situation in the market is not so easy. There's a lot of demand, so we have discussions about what is the realistic plan for the next years, how to increase the stocks of ammunition. But this is one of the lessons learned from Russia's war against Ukraine, that we absolutely need to have a good storage of ammunition. And then, of course, other types of defense equipment also. And Estonia has been giving a lot of military assistance to Ukraine, but then it's in the process of then replacing and restoring its own stocks. So that is also a challenging process. So to sum up, we are in a difficult situation, unpredictable situation, but at the same time, I think we have to keep in mind that even small countries have agency in this situation. We should not get despaired and hopeless, but we actually have to do the maximum that we can to strengthen our own defense, to work with our allies, to do as much as we can to support Ukraine, to increase the cost of war on Russia. There are no quick magical solutions to end the war. We have to be prepared for long conflict and long-term threat that we somehow have to manage. And we believe that collectively, actually, NATO and the Western countries do have the necessary resources. But so far, we don't have sufficient collective political will. So we need to work further on generating that. I think I will stop there.
Well, thanks a lot for this insight from Estonia. And I already see there are questions on the chat. We will take these questions later. I will now turn to Mateusz Piotrowski with a question about another country that is preparing for the worst case scenario and to deter a Russian aggression. So, as we know, Poland is engaged in the most ambitious rearmament program in Europe. Where will it be, this program of rearmament in 2025? And what can we expect for the realization of this plan? Is it going to be fully implemented?
Yep, sure. So first, thanks for inviting me and bringing the opportunity to to add the Polish voice to the table. My points in general wouldn't be so much different from the curiosity points. I guess we have the pretty much same perspective, but on the national level, I can add a little more. So by far, probably everyone knows that we are spending more than 4% GDP on defense. It's 4% too this year. It's gonna be 4%. 7.7% GDP, meaning something around 47 billion dollars, of course. Sorry, so non-budget seen that before in Poland. I mean, it's a lot. And there is actually a social support for it. I mean, of course, you could always give more money on education, on social and healthcare, but at the moment, there is not a big debate that we are spending too much on defense. I mean, most of the of the common people sees the danger from Russia, from Belarus, and not only the military one, like tanks and planes coming, but also the hybrid threat through the migration crisis created by the Lukashenko in Belarus. So how this will look in 2025? I mean, in terms of it's not only about the modernization of the armed forces. As Estonia did, we also, and of course in numbers there was more because we had a bigger military. I mean, it's just that. So we added pretty much, I wouldn't say everything, but a lot of the old Soviet equipment that we could quickly provide to the Ukrainian military. And now we also reinforcing our armed forces with the new equipment. Some programs started even before, like 2018, 2019, but some of them like not so fresh, but still newer Abram tanks, M1A1 are the modernization programs that we started after the giving the old Soviet tanks to the Ukraine. I would say that the common thing or the main agenda behind the modernization program of the Polish armed forces is to build the most powerful, at least on the eastern flank, but I would even say in Europe right now, and more capable land forces at the moment. Therefore, we are not giving that much of attention, unfortunately, but you cannot have everything to Air Force and even less attention to the naval forces, which is kind of a shame because, even when we are looking at those incidents with critical infrastructure in the Baltic Sea, you could say there we are more secure with Finland and Sweden in NATO, that Baltic Sea is the so-called NATO lake, right? But with those incidents, we still see that if you're planning participation in critical infrastructure in the seas, you need naval capabilities, and I guess we will get there at some point. But in the shorter term, I guess it's more on our allies. We are counting on our allies to secure these seas where we are looking, for the secure border with Belarus, reinforcing the Baltic states as well, and have a lot of joint trainings together, not only with regional partners, but mainly with the United States. And this is my another point. So it's been a year. Actually, it's been a year with the new Polish government and the 3 days extra. But one of the pillars of the Polish security policy is still the same, which means that we need the United States in Europe. We want United States in Poland. I mean, in terms of the military presence, this government wants to do it as well. Of course, we at the moment have something around 10,000 US soldiers, but 5,000 can be withdrawn as they are the temporary reinforcement connected to the Russian aggression, full-scale invasion in Ukraine. So I would say that some kind of a political goal would be to, permanently establish those rotational additional presence in Poland, to grow those permanent number, of course, meaning in rotation to something around 10,000. And I'm thinking of how to do it. I mean, in a sense, of course, I agree that in terms of the security cooperation, most challenging thing is the war in Ukraine, how it will develop the peace negotiations. It will influence the NATO and bilateral relations with the US. You cannot, divide those things. You cannot have a bad peace deal in Ukraine and then sit with the US administration and say that everything is fine and we can cooperate on bilateral. I mean, the bad peace deal in Ukraine will influence meaning Poland, but meaning the whole Europe as well, our security. So if you are thinking about some, this will touch a little upon the question that was asked, but I still would leave it. I mean, if you're thinking about the security agreements that may come up from those peace talks, that United States will negotiate something and then probably will push the European countries to do those agreements with the Ukraine to actually bring their military to Ukraine, because I think that's what it's about. I mean, if you're not ready to deploy your troops to Ukraine, I mean, those guarantees may be very fast tested by Russia without the foreign presence of the military in Ukraine, of course, those partnered countries' presence. So when I'm thinking of it, I'm thinking that, Poland maybe won't be the leader, won't be the first country to jump off and say, yeah, we can do it, at least not for the moment, but there may be a moment in 2025 when those negotiations and this peace deal will be the best opportunity to have a peace, at least for the medium term. There will be a group of countries who will jointly say that we are ready to do it. And then that's what I'm thinking of. You can argue with the United States that, okay, you don't want to cooperate on this. I mean, in terms of sending your troops to Ukraine for your political reasons, that's fine. But as a NATO ally, you should actually, reinforce your presence, not only because of the security dimension, but also the political one. And that will be my last point. My feeling is, which is for me, it's very easy to say because I'm not a Russian expert, that Russia is still thinking in some kind of the Cold War mentality. So if there is a US presence, we are thinking that it's, more serious. We feel threatened because it's the nuclear power. I mean, pretty much the same as Russia, right? But I mean, it's the serious power that you need to have a look on. And so in this sense also of this thinking, I mean, we could get not only in Poland but also on the whole eastern flank more allied forces. Would be something good to see after there will be some peace or ceasefire. Actually, peace is a bad word in that sense. So when the ceasefire would be negotiated in Ukraine, I guess we should see more allied forces in the eastern flank. But again, the U.S. presence will be crucial, and I'm very curious how this negotiations. I guess in some way it will be the bilateral negotiations, but in some way it has to be the NATO level as a whole organization and other allies. So I'm curious how this administration will be actually ready to do such a thing, to engage with the NATO allies, but let themselves also for their internal politics to say that we are done with aiding Ukraine for the future. And that will be my final point for the moment.
Well, thank you, Mateusz, and you are right to go beyond the initial question, because what you said about the future negotiation is very important. So I will now reach to Andreas, who is joining us from Kiev. And your country too is concerned with domestic issues. And from Germany, what can we expect with the future coalition, whatever it may be? And also, what can we expect for the future of the Zeitenwende?
Yeah, thanks for having me in this. I'm honored to be part of this. To say something now about Germany is almost as difficult as about the future US behavior, or maybe even more difficult, because we will have these elections on 23rd of February. And although one gets already the feeling how the elections will come out, or what results there will be, the actual policies of Germany are still, to me, unclear. So we have now a number of rather encouraging statements by the likely future Chancellor, Friedrich Merz, the head of the CDU, and it looks now as if the CDU will be winning this election and will be also the leading party of the next governing coalition. However, how then these pronouncements by Merz will be implemented is difficult to say so far. The composition of the Bundestag the parliament is unclear. It's so far unclear how many parties there will be in the parliament, and how then coalitions can be formed, whether there may be enough votes for a two-party coalition, or whether only a three-party coalition is possible again, and whether then and which parties then would be in the new coalition. That means which parties would be the junior partners of the CDU, and oddly it can be, or it's even likely to be, that the Social Democrats will again be part of this new coalition government as junior partners of the new coalition. And it will be interesting to see what happens then actually to Scholz. Will he simply become an ordinary minister or vice chancellor in this new government? Germany has now also changed in a way that we have sort of two dividing lines within the political spectrums. We have the pro-Western and anti-Western parties, and both the right-wing anti-Western party, the Alternative for Germany, AfD, and the now major left-wing anti-Western party, the Bündnis Sarah Wagenknecht, Union of Sarah Wagenknecht, have recently become unusually anti-Western. So the current AfD, Alternative for Germany, is much more anti-Western than the early Alternative for Germany, and the Union of Sarah Wagenknecht is much more anti-Western, and you could even say anti-Ukrainian, than the left party out of which this union has come, and probably this union of Wagenknecht will replace the left party in the next Bundestag, and the left party will not probably pass the 5% barrier. So we have this dividing line between Western and anti-Western parties, and it looks actually as if the two anti-Western parties, the AfD and the Wagenknecht Union, will be remain stigmatized and isolated and will not become a part of of a governing coalition. But we have in the centrist parties also, both among the parties and within the parties, a new dividing line between, I would say, those who suffer from strategic infantilism and those who have a more sort of realistic and more pragmatic view of things in Eastern Europe. So there is, unfortunately, a majority of the SPD suffers, I think, from the strategic infantilism and thinks that if you are accommodating or not as resolute as Germany could be towards Russia, this will be good for Germany. And then you have also, even within the Social Democrats, a minority that is more strategically mature, I would say. In the CDU, you have, I would say, a majority which is strategically mature, but also some, especially in Bavaria, I would say, strategic infantile politicians who think that Germany can somehow avoid the confrontation with Russia by not delivering all of the necessary weapons and not giving all of the necessary permissions to Ukraine. So this is actually the major new dividing line within the centrist parties, and that will be also, I would think, a major problem for the new government, how to bring together these sort of strategically infantile politicians who are playing with the fear, widespread fear in Germany of being drawn into this war, of World War III, of a nuclear war on the one side, and the more realistically and pragmatically oriented politicians. And you have them in all parties. And you have actually all of these sort of strategically more mature and strategically more infantile people in all of the major centrist parties. And how this will then play out in the policy making is and policy shaping is, for me, still unclear. What is, I think, not only for Germany but also for other countries of the West necessary is an additional argument to what we already discussed here today, to the usual things that we hear, that Russia's aims are not, imperial aims are not limited to Ukraine, and they are also directed towards the Baltic countries, the Southern Caucasus, Moldova, and so on. Then the second argument is that Russia is, of course, anti-Western. It wants to break up the European Union, the NATO, and so on. These are valid arguments, although I think there are also, there are many people who argue against that, who think that this war is really about Ukraine, and Ukraine has the special meaning for Russia, and let's say Georgia and Estonia are not as important. But that is, of course, it's a speculation. And then the argument against the anti-Western direction of, or the anti-Western, or the threat of Russia towards Western Europe and NATO and so on. The counter argument here is often that, well, if Russia cannot deal with Ukraine, how can it deal with NATO? So we shouldn't be too worried about it. These are just the arguments. I'm just stating them here. I'm not taking a position on here. A third argument, I think, which has been underestimated or underemphasized so far, is the nature of Ukraine as an ordinary member of the international community and ordinary member of the United Nations, OSCE, Council of Europe, and so on, and the global, in fact, importance that Ukraine has for the stability, not so much and not in first of all of the liberal international order, but of the sort of traditional order of states. So what we're dealing here is not just a war and not just an intervention. What we are dealing is an annihilation war, in German Vernichtungskrieg, aiming at the genocide of an elimination of the Ukrainian nation as an independent cultural community and as an independent nation state, and also not just intervention and invasion, but annexation. Also not just occupation and creating of republics like in Abkhazia or in Moldova, in Transnistria, but actually annexation. And that this then makes this a war that has much wider implications for the international order. If this is then ratified in some sort of Minsk III agreement by the international community, these annexations, the admission of genocide, of ethnic cleansing, of Russification in the annexed territories. This is, of course, a break of the order that has emerged since 1945, and that should be also something that is then it should be interesting also for countries like the US. So if you have then this attack by a nuclear weapon state, Russia on a non-nuclear weapon state, this is, of course, not just an encouragement then of other countries to get nuclear weapons to extend their territories and commit genocide in their neighboring countries. This is also, of course, a very stark warning to the smaller non-nuclear weapon states that may have larger neighbors with territorial appetite towards them, that they cannot rely any longer on international law, international organizations, international solidarity, and that they may have a fate as bad as Ukraine. I've actually spent about 25 years talking to Armenians and trying to explain to them that this whole argument about Nagorno-Karabakh being something very special and so special that international law does not apply, will not fly, this argument, and that this is something that Armenians have been telling themselves and the world all the time, but international law only functions if you do not make these sort of exceptions, and if you are not allow these sort of breakup of states, although this is, of course, was a much more sort of benign, if you can say, almost vegetarian case, because not even Armenia recognized Nagorno-Karabakh as an independent entity. So, but these sort of this Russian argument about the exceptionality of the Ukrainian situation, that Ukraine is exceptionally fascist, exceptionally anti-Ukrainian, exceptionally anti-Russian, exceptionally dangerous for Russia, is, of course, all arguments that other countries could then make towards their neighboring countries, that there is some sort of exception that would allow them to annex neighboring territories and to commit genocide there. And finally, maybe if I still have a couple of minutes on the sort of Trump issue, so what I see here is, to me, two questions. Something that Mateusz has been already dealing with is if there is a coalition of the willing that will take more responsibility towards towards Ukraine, I think it will very much depend on how the US will behave. Whether, first of all, the US may itself become a member of such a coalition of the willing that would take upon itself special responsibility as long as Ukraine is not a NATO member, or if at least, as Mateusz already indicated, the US would be willing to reassure countries like Poland, like Estonia, Finland, and so on, that would be willing to invest more in politically invest and maybe also militarily invest more in Ukraine, to send troops, for instance, and to reassure them with maybe additional declarations, maybe additional assurances, guarantees, to give them, so to say, the freedom to become active beyond the borders of NATO on Ukrainian territory, and to make sure that they would be protected by the US. So that would be perhaps more, is what we should be talking about. That how can we persuade Trump to reinforce, so to say, the NATO guarantees towards the NATO members in a way to allow the more forward-leaning NATO members to, for instance, send troops to Ukraine, and then be reassured against a possible retaliation on their territory by Russia. So I think that will be one crucial question. And the other one is the security guarantees. And I think here one can go back to the good old Budapest Memorandum and what has been said there in 1994. If you have read it in the fourth article of the Budapest Memorandum, it says that Russia, the UK, and the United States reaffirmed their commitment to seek immediate United Nations Security Council action to provide assistance to Ukraine as a non-nuclear weapon state party to the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons if Ukraine should become a victim of an act of aggression or an object of a threat of aggression in which nuclear weapons are used. So that is actually now this, we have this case. This is something addressed by the Budapest Memorandum. The odd thing here being that the organ that would address this issue is the United Nations Security Council, where Russia has a veto power, and thereby this article is being enabled by sort of enables disenabled by itself. So we have this good article, but it's sort of ridiculous because it brings in the Security Council where Russia has a veto. And my suspicion is that this is something that has been smuggled in by Russia in 1994 into the text of this memorandum, maybe in the same way in which in 2022, Russia smuggled in the security guarantees for Ukraine in the Istanbul talks, a veto right for Russia to actually decide whether the security guarantees will be enacted only with the permission of Russia. And here we have a similar situation. So I think what has to happen here is that basically the UK and the US that gave these security assurances in 1994 should come back to it, and they should provide Ukraine, as long as it is not a NATO member, with security guarantees similar to those that Finland and Sweden had in the meantime between their after they had applied for membership and until they finally got in. And they should actually create something like a mutual aid pact, a military alliance, a sort of small NATO for Ukraine. I think that is, for me at least, that was the deal from 1994, that Ukraine would give up its nuclear weapons and would then get these security assurances. This is now not possible because of the ridiculous formulation of this Article 4 in the Budapest Memorandum, but these countries have to go back. And then once they have then a sort of a small alliance with Ukraine, then they could ask other countries, member countries of, let's say, the Non-Proliferation Treaty, to join such an alliance, and then to actually give these security assurances as long as the NATO accession has not yet happened.
Well, then question. I will now turn to Radu for a question about Romania. So Romania, of course, is now gaining and deserving a lot of attention these last weeks. What can we expect, again, for national defense policy? And what can we expect facing the new Trump administration when it comes to the role Romania wants to play in both the EU and NATO?
Oh, thank you. What can I say? Being the last allows me to actually position Romania based on what was already said, meaning that in certain ways we should have an approach that gets us closer to the, say, the readiness of Estonia and of Poland in certain cases. But at the political level and at a social level, we have, I don't know, a sort of distance that sometimes makes me think that geography does not always work on our mentality and the way we understand what's happening next door. It is not an easy way to explain what happens in Romania because, to be fully honest, and I like full honesty because it comes with criticism, and criticisms can be quite healthy sometimes. We were not ready in many ways for what was happening in the eastern parts of Europe before the war started. And we tried to build up, especially now in times of crisis, something that resembles credible deterrence and more strength, more resilience. I'm saying this because the relationship with Ukraine had been not necessarily neglected, but wasn't exactly positive before 2022, in ways that, of course, have to do with history. Parts of Romanian territory between the interwar period are now part of Ukraine. Of course, that was by the decision of Moscow, not by the decision of Kiev. This is something that is not always explained. But in this may help in understanding why today what we saw during the elections, the recent elections in Romania, can be interpreted through the prism of distancing from the Ukraine case, not willing to participate, not willing to attend the country that needs strategic help. And the question was, how was this possible? How was this put into political practice, into political opinions, and expressed in ways that worried the political establishment? Because now we have to separate, for instance, between what the political establishment achieved and therefore can shape the position of Romania as a member of or credible member of NATO alliance and as a strong partner of the Trump administration, and which is the pressure that a civil society, or to put it in other terms, the society or the unprepared society can put on the government in ways that would disrupt a bit the Euro-Atlantic integration of Romania. So we are buying as much as we can, as hard as we can, and hopefully spending everything that we decided to put on the table, meaning that we have 2.5% dedicated to acquisition to the military, but the acquisitions, for instance, are a bit lagging behind, not necessarily because we don't have a plan for acquisitions. We are focusing especially on air defense for the moment, but because some of the orders that were passed were not honored, meaning we don't find what we are looking for on the market is not available or will be produced only in time. That's why, for instance, the 2.5% that Romania dedicated to defense was not integrally spent. We spent last year only 1.6% of the 2.5 we were willing to. So that's one thing. Secondly, what it seems to be emerging now under the double pressure of the war in Ukraine, as well as the domestic crisis we are facing at home, is trying to build up a new strategy that deals with better communication with our own population, but also with this interesting fringe of the retired Romanian army that is a part of the anti-establishment, anti-NATO trend that we saw emerging in the last couple of years in Romania. And sociologists as well as political analysts try to get to the bottom, to the bottom of this from various points of view, which is the heart, which is the core of this discontent. And they could identify, for instance, the way the government does not fully communicate with the Romanian army, or even worse, the way the government shaped a defense approach and a security approach that rather relies on our allies instead of fully engaging those parts of the Romanian army that could still contribute. So you can imagine those who are retired today, but still have a nostalgia of, serving the country and embodying something that was crucial for the development of the country. Not only feel excluded, but they are now online, and they feed the online environment with nostalgia, but also with criticism directed towards the Western approach of Romania's integration. And they are part of the problem, not of the solution, meaning that they feel deprived of importance by not being consulted, by not being asked which could be the steps that Romania can take for better or for reinforcing security. And this matched perfectly the discontent, because of mismanagement, economic mismanagement, poor institutional communication, party politics that were more important than state governance, which are typical for Romania in the last 30 years. Therefore, a mismanaged country that now questions the model that was applied to the European and Atlantic integration. And we are struggling to find not necessarily a new one, but to improve it. So in terms of infrastructure, of military infrastructure, there is, as I said, there is an appetite for acquisitions. It's also a bit of an emergency, just to make sure. I'll just give you an example. Now we want to buy everything available, but that availability depends on the strategy we apply to air defense. In this case, apparently, Romania dreams of an Iron Dome possibility, and therefore working with Israel, working with the United States, working with everybody who can offer such equipment in short time. In terms of terrestrial strategy, it is still debated if the previous doctrine can be applied. Of course, there is no Soviet Russia next to us. There is a Ukraine next to us, but there is there is a Russia, post-Soviet Russia in the Black Sea, and we are de facto neighbors of Russian waters in Crimea, as they are. So we do focus from this point of view on the Black Sea for the moment. What else came in as extremely important was mere and simple infrastructure. Meaning building highways, which suddenly was transformed into an emergency. I'm not sure, and of course I have to say this with a certain degree of irony, if this happened because of some sort of spiritual awakening of our government, or because they finally understood, our allies put pressure on the Romanian government to finish what is crucial in providing military help to Romania in case something happens. For instance, we do need highways that cross the Carpathians, and until recently, this simply did not happen, meaning that the country could be simply cut in two just by a military intervention of a powerful, let's say extremely powerful, theoretical Russian army. In terms of analysis, if you read, for instance, the analysis, more or less public, of our retired generals, of our specialists, there is still a very high degree of, a certain high degree of letting things happen, and then we'll see how we deal with them. Meaning, empirical approach of defense, which is never recommended. Or, for instance, calculations like, the Russian army is too busy in Ukraine for them to plan an attack on Romania. It is absolute fiction. I'm saying this because we've seen how neglectful Romanian authorities have been in terms of hybrid warfare. We were focusing on Moldova, and we saw Moldova, tried to see Moldova as an experiment. Look what's happening there. Meanwhile, a fully fledged experiment was taking place in Romania, influencing the deepest strata of Romanian society in a way desired by Russia. It was not necessarily a Russian interference, but Russia meeting the disappointed and Russia meeting those who are simply unhappy with the development of Romania in the last 2 decades, or the strategy that was embraced more recently by the government. Therefore, Romania is rebuilding itself, to put it in these terms, and try to become credible again, because us not seeing the hybrid war threat, I think it gave the Romanian intelligence a blow in terms of credibility, not being able to anticipate the depth and the width of such a trend that simply ended up changing the perspectives on the Romanian presidential elections. We'll see what happens until spring. But until spring, we will have Donald Trump. And during his previous mandate, I can say that the relationship was exceptionally good, or surprisingly good in bilateral terms, simply because we host part of the American anti-missile system in southern Romania. And like Poland, we are basically part of the American set strategy of European defense, more or less, or of NATO defense, or of American interest defense. Because when divisive, the military base, was offered to the United States in 2005, the main menace was considered to be Iran. Iran back then was still far from acquiring nuclear weapons. They are way less far today, so they do become a threat. Russia never bought such an explanation, or Russia never considered it as to be true. From the very beginning, Russia considered the American military base in southern Romania as being directed against their own interests. Now we know that it is also an option, and it should be an option given the circumstances. So from this point of view, Romanian authorities consider that the American presence at the Black Sea, first of all, having Romania as a geopolitical ally because of the geography and the vicinity to extremely hot spots on this fracture line that goes from the Arctic through the Black Sea and the Caucasus to the Middle East, offers Romania leverage in the negotiations with the Trump administration. Not to mention that the previous ambassador, Mark Zuckerman, and Adrian, too much Facebook these days. Adrian Zuckerberg was very dedicated. He was of Romanian origins. He was very dedicated to also the business partnership of Romania with the United States, and therefore, not only business flourished, and you would see strategic American investment in Romanian economy, especially in energy. But you would also see Romania slowly affiliating to strategic security decision-making processes of the United States, especially what concerns Chinese technology, the 5G technology, where us being, let's say, disappointed after years and years of the Chinese that were contractors for years and did not actually intervene, we said, we put an end to the contract with the Chinese, with the Turks. We switched to the Americans, and it was done with a signature in the summer of 2020. So this also helps in, we consider, it also helps in the transactional approach that the Trump administration may have, and say, do you buy from us? Do you follow our interests? And the answer is largely yes. We also buy the F-35, which was recently approved both by our parliament and by the American authorities. So at least on this line, theoretically, things are going. things seem to have a substance. Now we have to translate this, to transport this into proper, stable arrangements with the United States, and also do our part. I mean, indeed, I do understand the critique coming from the retired militaries of Romania that you can't just rely on what the allies can do for you. It's simply not healthy as a reasoning and as a strategy. The allies may be busy, and this is something that is a bit very similar to the approach that Romania had 80 years ago during the Second World War. And it stayed in the public mentality, and it surged or researched once with the historical nostalgia related to the 1930s, not in the best ways. But it came up with, we didn't want to fight a war against the Anglo-Americans. We were dedicated. We wanted that type of partnership. We didn't want to fight a war with Germany. We actually wanted to just keep the Soviet Union away. So it's hard to explain, given the geographic position of Romania, how complicated the Second World War was, and how complicated the situation is now if something, for instance, keeps our allies busy someplace else, and we still cannot perform to defend our own interests because we were unprepared, politically divided, and socially antagonistic. It's definitely not an easy place to live. Romania has, of course, it's needless to insist now, historical gaps to cover in terms of development. But history doesn't wait for those who do not do their homework. And by now, given the situation in Ukraine, I think the political establishment should have known better. But also, and that's the thing that raises many questions to analysts today, the society is clearly not absorbing the gravity of the situation and what a war means in real terms in a neighboring country. Not a war that was that has to do, with minor disputes, but with the disappearance of an entire country. Replaced by another one, replaced by the interests of another one, that will put pressure on Romania as well. So it's a domino game that some parts of the Romanian society still refuse to see.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, I will have to ask you the same question, every one of you, but 3 minutes answer to this same question about the French obsession, which is, of course, the strategic autonomy. To which extent do you believe the new Trump administration will lead your country to push for a more assertive agenda when it comes to strategic autonomy, for instance, on common defense spending or supporting the EU defense industry? I will start with Christy, because I know you have to leave earlier.
Yes, thank you. I will have to go in a couple of minutes. I don't think the notion of strategic autonomy will become any more popular or less controversial in the Baltic states with the second Trump administration. The Baltic states are all for strengthening European defense capability and European defense industry. I see Mateusz is nodding, Poland is with us, the Nordic countries are with us. But we are very aware that in the coming years, we need to keep the US committed to our regional defense and also keep the US committed to Ukraine, because Europeans are not ready to cope with the Russian threat without the US. So also when we discuss possibilities to send, deploy some troops from European countries to Ukraine, I think we actually need to have this discussion, but it's not going to fly in our region if it is framed as a European project that shows European autonomy. No, I think it can only succeed if the US is also somehow on board and backing it, probably not with US boots on the ground in Ukraine, because that's what the US is likely not willing to do, but still backing the arrangement. And also, I think this can fly only if it is done in a way that kind of keeps NATO united, that comes together with like further assurances to the eastern flank countries. This is something that Andreas was talking about. And it comes together with actually security guarantees to Ukraine so that there will be peace to be kept by the troops that will be sent there. But so far, it's premature to actually plan for sending the troops. We need to have the discussion, but we don't have answers to the questions about the preconditions to make it happen. And now I have to go. Thank you very much. And sorry, I have to leave
Thanks
now.
a lot for your time. Really, thank you. So maybe with Mateusz to leave the floor.
Sure. Again, I mean, it will be pretty much the same. I have to agree, but I mean, a few years back, I would say that Poland wouldn't support the strategic autonomy per self, even with the current government. I mean, you need to have some kind of a cooperation. You cannot say that it should be something different from NATO. You have to strengthen the European pillar of the security, that's for sure, and every party in Poland will support that idea. Including the current governing coalition. But I mean, we are in different times right now. So I guess that this Polish government will be very careful about the language, because talking about the European autonomy could become some kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy from the United States. Like, do you want to have an autonomy? You can have it next day. Like, we are withdrawing from Europe if you want it, if you want to have some kind of it. So I guess there will be some kind of a struggle in terms of the political dialogue, how to talk about it, how to actually show, because we need to show as Europe that we are doing more on security. And it's not, I mean, coming from Poland, it's easy to say, but we need to show it as a whole Europe that actually we do something in terms of in NATO, of course, but also as countries, as the EU, more cooperation between NATO and the EU. Actually, I would say in terms of the industry strategy, in terms of the ammunition acquisition, like was previously said, I guess that those kind of moves would be seen positively in the White House. But again, I completely agree that we need the United States in Europe on the eastern flank. We cannot talk really about the autonomy. But on the other hand, I do believe that, I mean, I do believe that we can, during the Trump administration, see the lower numbers in terms of a military presence in Europe generally. I don't believe that Europe will completely withdraw from Europe or from NATO. I don't see that happen. But we could see this political kind of language from Trump, that US, meaning his administration, doesn't want to cooperate in Europe in terms of military anymore. And then we will have a new reality to deal with in terms of this European autonomy, meaning that United States are just giving the autonomy to us. That would be something really difficult. And I guess that even back in that sense, Poland and the other countries still will call for the US, presence there, and try to show that it's not only about our interest, but also very much about their interest. But again, there are some projects, energy projects, military projects like the Aegis Ashore in Poland and Romania, that in the common sense cannot really make the United States withdraw like 100% from Europe, and that's what is making me more peaceful this time.
Yes, your kind of peaceful answer should be listened in France, because, as you know, a lot of people are quite delusional about strategic autonomy with Trump episode 2. So thank you. And maybe Andreas now about strategic autonomy.
Yeah, well, as Mateusz indicated, we may get soon more autonomy than we want from the US, and we may have no other choice than actually to sort of reconstitute European alliance. Now, the problem is, of course, also that Britain has left the EU. Otherwise, the EU could have been an organization that could have perhaps tried to do something. But now, with Britain outside, this becomes more complicated. We have now a new commission with a new defense commissioner, and also a new staff that is rather well prepared, I would say, for this situation. But I guess one of the key questions here is Germany, because that's the biggest country, also the biggest economy, and actually also with a sizable defense economy, but with a sort of a deficient, as I've called it, partly infantile political culture or geopolitical culture, if you want to call it that way, and also with a ridiculous, in current times, constitutional limitation for budgetary spending, which is basically a rule for peace times, which is a good thing in principle to have a limitation for the budget to become, or for the state to become indebted. But if you have a major war at your doorstep, then this is, of course, a ridiculous rule. And now Germany is struggling with it, and that's why we have now actually a financial planning that foresees a reduction of German national help for Ukraine in 2025, and even an altogether sort of moving away from helping directly on a national level Ukraine in 2026. So this is now a rather ridiculous situation, and has a lot to do with these constitutional rules. And so I mean, I'm hopeful that things will change after the 23rd of February when the Bundestag elections will happen, and then hopefully quickly a new coalition will be formed, and then Scholz be replaced by Merz, but who I think has the right instincts, and also other people in the CDU, Norbert Röttgen, Ulrich Kiesewetter, and even partly among the Social Democrats, like the current defense minister, Boris Pistorius. They have the right instincts, but will that be enough to trigger a change, both a cultural change, a budgetary change, a constitutional change, or legal change, or a reinterpretation of these constitutional limitations to the degree that we would actually become more strategically autonomous than we currently are? I'm also afraid that we will need the US for a transition period, at least. And even then, will we ever have, if the US sort of departs from Europe, then we will have some nuclear capability, but not much, or much less than with this US presence. So, I think we will have to persuade somehow the Americans to remain engaged, and maybe this argument that I earlier made about the integrity of the non-proliferation regime, the upholding of the UN, of the basic state order, not so much of a liberal order, but the basic state order with territorial integrity, national sovereignty, inviolable borders, that should be something that one would think is in the interests of the US, and maybe that would then help us to persuade even the MAGA Republicans to be engaged, because it could eventually fire back on the US if the non-proliferation regime unravels, for instance. That would, of course, then also become a threat for the US if countries around the world start acquiring nuclear weapons or other weapons of mass destruction. So something like that would be, I think, necessary to keep the United States on board, because otherwise they may argue with some justification, you have there a European war, so it's a European thing to solve this issue, and why do you need that for us? You have a large economy, you have 500 million people, so you have armies. You should do it yourself, and we should. I think we have the capacity to do it. We just don't have yet the culture and the political will to become more autonomous strategically.
Thank you. And finally, the same, of course, question to Radu, who happens to be both the connoisseur of the French language, but also of the French strategic thinking about the strategic autonomy.
Yeah, the thing is now, of course, Romania has French military forces, and France is now a framework nation in Romania, which is contrasting with the way Romania approached initially the strategic autonomy thing. We call it thing because we immediately, in 1 year and a half, when we redesigned in 2020 the national defense strategy, and security strategy, we labeled the strategic autonomy more in economic terms of resilience. It had little to do with defense. It had little to do with common foreign policy or, any kind of sovereignty acquired by the European Union as an entity. So we ran with that definition. But at the same time, various things changed, let's put it like that, in the relationship with France, especially in 2021, when Romania agreed to help France in Africa. And that was done with negotiating a sort of security guarantee for Romania, which was barely or rarely discussed in public, but it explained why for France it was so easy in 2022, February, to actually offer this type of help to Romania on the front line. It also comes with older approaches of the Romanian presidency, when in 2016, 2015, we interpreted a bit. Trump was in power, and we never knew if what was going to happen with NATO. 2016, 2017, we imagined that a Franco-German something would, in defense terms, something would actually start to think that Romania can be a part of a larger defense perimeter of Europe. So, meaning that we kind of expected this to happen, but let's say on terms that would not be affiliated to a strategy that was designed only in one country. This is why strategic autonomy designed in only one way and applied to the others was not exactly, not necessarily rejected, but simply put aside and not discussed. So today is a bit different, because we wonder if not NATO goes away by the United States becoming dormant, or what would be the next best thing? The next best thing, of course, would be for us to actually do our homework in terms of defense and military acquisition. But I think that the greatest temptation of Romania would be to approach France and Britain and other countries that were present in defending and attending the various military exercises on the eastern flank, Spain, Italy, for instance, Poland, needless to say, in order to build an alliance that would help the Romanian security and the Romanian defense perimeter. So my belief is that Romania will be ready for a sort of regional or multilateral approach of defense, even if NATO or NATO goes dormant, or if the strategic autonomy, initially designed to be more centralized, would not work. So we are flexible, given the fact that security really goes first when it comes to the very existence of a nation state.
Okay. Well, thank you to all of you. I'm sorry for the question in the chat. You answered one of them about deploying troops in Ukraine, but I'm sorry we don't have time for the other questions. But thanks again for all of you. It was really a pleasure to listen to you, especially about the national perspective for both national defense policies and the way your countries can see what to expect with the new Trump administration. So thank you again for your time and for your insights. So merci beaucoup.